We will listen to Awada, who will give us an overview of her study. Good morning. This is a study entitled The Youth Use of Media Measuring the Presence of Extremism. I will not go over all the results, but the most prominent ones. This study is research to use or to understand how youth use media in general. Therefore, we have an overview and a survey of this use, and we assess its result on their behavior and whether it takes them towards extremism or not. It also reveals their knowledge of media and digital literacy. In order to do this measurement, we have conducted focus group with university or high school students and their teachers in the different Lebanese governorates, and we assess their use of TV. What do they watch? Do they watch TV or not? The interviews have shown that the majority of youth are no longer interested in watching TV. However, a number of them does not know how to turn a TV on at all. The majority of the Lebanese or youth follow MTV, followed by Al Jadid and LBC, followed by Al Manar in the south and Baalbek Hermel. In addition to shy viewing of OTV, whereas the youth do not watch Teleliba at all, which is the official Lebanese channel. What do they watch? Which programs do they watch? They rarely follow social programs, and if it happens, it's by mistake. And when their parents are watching them, they did not feel comfortable watching these programs on the Lebanese TV because they are bad for human cases when they raise personal questions for the artists, especially with Salah Tizani through Bila Tashfir program, which welcomed one of the biggest mafia presidents in Lebanon. Arts programs and entertainment programs are more popular among youth compared with political programs and the news, which are considered as providing lies and welcoming guests that promote confessionalism and social problems. Elite students say they prefer political programs on international channels as opposed to the Lebanese channels because they tackle deeper subjects. In the foreign media, they talk about the state interest and national security, whereas on the Lebanese channels, guests talk about the needs and the requirements of political leaders and religious leaders. How do they use internet and social media? The average use of this media exceeds 10 hours per day among youth. In fact, WhatsApp is leading the pack and followed directly by Facebook, Messenger, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, followed by Facebook, Twitter, and Skype. Elite school students started moving away from Facebook because they are more affected by Snapchat and Instagram after WhatsApp. I will highlight an important idea here. The interviews have revealed that applications that allow the youth to chat are more widespread because it allows them to get in touch with their parents, their loved ones, and their friends. They do not chat with people they do not know, except for one young girl who was addicted to chatting with people she doesn't know over a different medium. What are the video games that are more widespread? The counter is the game that widely attracts youth, male youth, in internet cafes. Several reactions were recorded, starting with hands fighting and problems with weapons throughout the Lebanese governorates. Have they heard of media and digital literacy. Have teachers heard of it? Students have not heard of it, whereas a very small number of students have or teachers have understood it. They consider it as an educational program to raise the students' awareness using social media. It is also related to e-learning and the means to access information through media. Some high schools teach it under a media program or protected aid program. I will finally stop with the method to highlight extremism among youth. But before I delve into it, I will talk about the concept of extremism. We have done a review of the literature about extremism that starts with extremist ideas and can be developed as a behavior that is stuff that leads to the action itself. We start with family fanatism. One of the youth is a member of a WhatsApp group for his family that aims at restoring the title of a prince to them after they were deprived from it because of a historical problem. Therefore, this is one of the aspects of extremism. In order to respect teachings, religious teaching, one of the religious men removed the TV from his home because he was afraid for his kids, and he did not allow his children to watch TV outside. Women were also, or girls were also not allowed to publish their photos. Men and males were allowed to use WhatsApp, whereas the girl was not allowed to, and the father used to inspect his daughter's cell phone on daily basis, and he used to punish her if he found any application or chatting website. The behavioral extremism, the interviews have shown several cases. In fact, a group of 4 men have downloaded pornography videos and recorded them on DVDs and traded them and sold them in schools. Confessional extremism was most prominent in this study. I'll give you 2 case studies, even though I have more than 2 examples. The first case study was represented in one of the youth conducting a Facebook campaign against a Sunni Salafi Sheikh. He had recorded the Friday speech and highlighted the most prominent portions of this speech. In another case, one of the youth has created a virtual Facebook account after one of the problems in a Lebanese region that led to the massacre or to the killing of several people, and started this confessional rhetoric in one of the schools that almost led to the breakout of fighting in that school. Maybe you can continue the results of your study through the questions. I'm almost done with. I need just half a minute. Racism. One of the Lebanese channels was boycotted because it was broadcasting a series from a neighboring Arab country. We also focused on political extremism, which highlighted a major division among youth regarding the Syrian crisis, as well as other regional cases. We also noticed that some teachers refused to accept the friendship requests of their students on their Facebook and social media outlets. Thank you, Abada. We can say that social media are used either to mobilize people or to release or to focus on the differences among people. As she said, TV has become a tool that we only display at home. I think that hate speech is being conveyed through TV, and mobilization and recruiting is done through social media. It is important to talk about Lebanon because we have the different models and types, and through what you said, and regardless of our identity, maybe we can remember similarities, and this could lead to a discussion. Khalid Nasser, you are a consultant in family communication. You are a teacher in LAU and AUB. You will talk to us about the psychological trend of extremism among youth. Good morning. I will be very brief in order to allow time for questions. I'm going to talk about three main points in brief. I believe that extremism is a normal trend, and we are all extremists in a way or another. If I ask you now to introduce yourself and give me 3 words to introduce yourself, one of them will be highly related to you and to your identity. If I tell you, for example, I like to drink coffee in the morning, I am extremist to drink coffee. I love cycling, for example. These are part of our identity, and sometimes we can say extremism when we go to the extreme, and I'll give you an example. But we need sometimes to be extremists in our lives because, or especially when we are facing threat. If you're facing a lion, for example, we directly tend to lose our personal identity from a social identity perspective, and we are more attached to our social identity. We form a group because a group is more able to protect itself more than an individual. Therefore, we feel more security when we are gathered together and we are facing this imminent threat together. The more we face threats in our societies and communities, and the more media highlights these threats, we usually tend to be strongly attached to this social identity and define ourselves through it. If I ask you now, how do you define and introduce yourself? You could say, I am from Egypt, I'm from Iraq, I'm from Jordan. This is a social identity that is not always revealed when you are with people outside. When you travel, here in Lebanon, we criticize the Lebanese and Lebanon, but when we travel, we automatically start defending our country because this is where we come from. And when I am facing threats, uncertainties, we always feel stronger if we are to define ourselves through our social identity, meaning that there is someone behind me to support me. Second, in general, from a psychological standpoint, extremists, or we can be talking about a communist, socialist, Islamic, or capitalist extremism. It is the idea that I hold on to a certain theory, identity, where I feel that I am correct and everything else is wrong, and we see life in black and white only. You need to think, and I want you to think of yourself and to what extent you are dogmatic in your character. A dogmatic person is someone who sees black and white only, who does not accept a gray area, and who can easily stop talking to you if what you're saying goes against what he believes in. This is a dogmatic person. We often tend to believe that we are right and others are wrong. These are the extremist people. You see them going from a communist to an Islamic extremism, and then they go to a socialist extremism later. Khalid, allow me just to say one thing. You promised us to be brief.
فكمان في نفسية الشخص بتؤدي إلى التصدير التقرب.
Finally, from a dissonance perspective, these individuals hear what suits them, and the media provides them with that. They look for the channels that they will listen to because they are in line with their ideals, and they shut down anything that does not go with their ideals. We do not only focus on what the media gives us, but on what we consume from media. Khalid Nasser, thank you. I believe that we are researching the certain behaviors, extremist behaviors beyond hobbies. These extremist behaviors exceed and transcend ideologies because they involve personal conviction as well as the use of several justifications in the name of religion and extremism. It is important for us to try and understand and look for the psychological reasons of extremism. However, we are pushing towards studying these extremist behaviors. Nadine Mazloum, you are a journalist from Lebanon, and you are going to talk to us about your personal experience as a blogger. صباح الخير. سوف أتكلم بالإنجليزية. اسمي نادين مظلوم، وأنا أقوم بهذا العمل وأدرس مختلف وسائل الإعلام منذ 10 سنوات، وأقوم بإنتاج التقارير، ومؤخرا انتقلت إلى عالم المنصات الرقمية. لقد لاحظت من خلال تجربتي في الانتقال من الإنتاج إلى العالم الرقمي، لقد لاحظت أن هناك عدد كثير من الشباب على هذه المنصات ليسوا مهتمين بما تقوله وسائل الإعلام التقليدية، وفي هذه أو في رؤية مواجهة الناس لبعضهم البعض. لقد أظهرت الدراسات أن الشباب يهتمون أكثر بفيسبوك ووسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، ولقد ركزوا على MTV والجديد والLBC، ولكنهم لم يركزوا ولم يهتموا بالتلفزيون لبنان. لقد لاحظت أن الدول التي تتمتع بخدمة عامة أقوى تواجه نسبة متدنية من التطرف اليميني مثلا، وعندما نصل إلى وسيلة إعلام تصغي إلى الناس عوضا عن تغذيتهم بالخوف والقلق، نتعامل مع وسائل إعلام فعالة، ولبنان هو خير دليل على ذلك. ولقد لاحظت أن الشباب يهتمون بمواضيع لا تغطيها وسائل الإعلام التقليدية مثل البيئة وحقوق المرأة والمسائل الاجتماعية التي لا تحصل على التغطية الكافية في وسائل الإعلام التقليدية. وفي حال حظت بهذا الوقت فهي تعرض بطريقة تكرر الخوف والشك، وكلما اعتمدت وسائل الإعلام التقليدية على ذلك لجذب المشاهدين كلما ارتفع الخوف في المجتمع. إذن هذه تجربتي مع وسائل الإعلام الإلكترونية والتقليدية، وأنا أتطلع للإجابة على أسئلتكم. Thank you, Nadine. In fact, you raised a very important idea, which is public service. And among the questions that we raise is why do we face this trend toward extremism? We do not only focus on media and social media, but the equality in powers is oppression one of the reasons behind extremism. We will listen to you. We will take your questions. We will take a question from the right and another from the left. Who would like to start? Please introduce yourself, which country you come from, and what do you do? Hassan Choughali from Lebanon. I would like to comment on what I heard concerning extremism and the reasons behind it. Please allow me to inform you that you need to be brief in order to take as many questions as possible. I would like to say that there are 3 causes for extremism if we're talking about Lebanon: unemployment, ignorance, and poverty. These are, in my opinion, are the main reasons why people, the majority of the people, take sides and are extremist towards a leader, a confession, or an idea. This is not a question, then it's a comment. Maybe we can further develop it and ask Aubada, do you think, you talked about the elite high schools, what do you mean? You're talking about the private sector? The neo-extremist groups after Al-Qaeda have a special characteristic. They recruit doctors that are specialized in editing, shooting, media or digital platforms. We're not talking about a poor environment that is an incubator for extremism. Based on your study, thank you for your important question that highlights an important part in my study on media literacy education. Why do elite schools led to these results in my study? In one of these schools, I noticed that media literacy and digital literacy was given in all courses without exception. Students are being trained on analysis and criticism. And even these students, even if these students are receiving messages and polarization, they have developed a self-immunity to face them based on media literacy education. Thank you. We'll take another question. We need to look at an important point. There are these root causes for extremism. However, there's a fourth one, which is isolation. When the youth feels that no one is listening to them, no one cares about them, they are isolated from their environment. If we look at extremism in Europe, we find that they are from a third generation of Europeans, and they are paying their taxes, or they conducted the attacks in France. They are isolated, they are jobless, they are unemployed, they have done some petty theft, and they were incarcerated. This incarceration reinforces their extremism. This is a factor that we have not tackled, which is isolation. This isolation can also be a personal decision. Therefore, the question of integration is a long-standing issue. I think that we will take another question.
I got the answer before I asked my question. Good morning. Ammar Ghazali from Syria, from the Ministry of Information. You said that nowadays most of the youth are on social media and not really on television. So they are not really television fans. Do you think that this is due to the fact that what we see on televisions is becoming very traditional, like talk shows, dialogues, etc. are very traditional, so they are not really of interest for youngsters? And do you think that media administrations or institutions or top rank officials in the media field didn't do what they had to do in order to attract the youth and to follow nowadays trends? So today we see that youngsters are not even interested in reading newspapers. They are mainly on WhatsApp and social media. Even when they are together at home, they communicate through WhatsApp. So, and do you think that electronic tools will one day replace newspaper, so the press and TVs? So the question is to Nadine, who saw that most youngsters today are mainly interested in social media, and of course to Miss Obada. Obada said in her study that the sample that was studied do not read newspapers. I will answer this question. Of course, they do not read newspapers, and if they ever buy any newspaper, it's only to play the games at the end. Talking about the TV channels, I noted when I was conducting my study that there were some programs, and particularly leisure programs, have attracted a very high rate of audience among the youth, and the youngsters considered that these programs look like us, they represent what we like, etc. So I think that the quality of programs that is chosen by TV channels also is also important. And third, why do we see a lot of social media use, a lot of youngsters who use WhatsApp and other communication social media tools to communicate? It's because these tools are easy to handle. And why do these youngsters use more WhatsApp and social media? I think that our societies are societies of isolation. So we go to our work, we come back at home, we come back home, we would like to stay together. We do not have this sense of communication. So, and these tools give us the feeling that we are in communication with other people. They allow us to express ourselves, to share our problems. So I think this is what attracts youngsters nowadays. And regarding the other question related to the newspapers, I think that nowadays no one is reading newspapers, and particularly the youth, because newspapers do not express do not talk, do not use their languages. This newspaper uses, for example, classical Arabic, and this is not the language that we use every day. And that's why our youth prefer the language of social media, because this is the language that looks like them, that the language that they use every day. For example, blogs are the first source of information for these youth, and on these blogs, for example, the everyday dialect is used, so they feel that they are closer to these tools that made this information closer. And here we talk about democratization of information, so the information become closer to the youth. And these tools do not always represent the views of the owner of the newspaper or of the TV channel or the politician, most often who owns this or that media outlet. So the youth are more attracted by the social media because they are not interested in our newspapers and TV channels that are mostly or very often very biased. And these programs and debates and talk shows that we see on TV channels are not so very often these programs have a comforting effect. So when I hear someone who is who is having the same point of view as me, I will feel like a kind of comfort, and I will not be really mobilized towards any action. Based on what Nadine has said, so she said we are an isolated society. We have this isolation trend. We're talking about social media, about connections, about the fading of all types of borders. Do you think that these social media tools are making us more isolated or more open? I think that when we talk about social media, we talk about interpersonal relationships, about people who are communicating with each other. We're talking about people who are interacting with each other. And maybe this would lead to more isolation, because I'm only listening and I'm only interacting with the people I want to interact with. I'm interacting with individuals, not with journalists. I'm not open to any one who has a different point of view than mine, or I'm not open to anyone other than or outside the circle that I have chosen. I personally, for example, do not watch TV. Why? Because you have alternatives? Because you have the social media? Or because you are not interested? No, but because I felt that the news are always the same and I'm not interested anymore. So this is to say that individuals are more important today than TVs or than the people we see on TVs. Please use the microphone. I just had a comment. Dr. Khaled mentioned two questions. First, so when we have a certain idea, we can all become extremists. And here allow me to disagree with you, because when you support an idea, it doesn't mean that you are an extremist, because extremism means refuting the other violently. So if I am convinced with a certain idea, it's fine, but I can share with you this idea, this opinion, even if you have different opinions. So, and as long as I do not have any problem sharing with you and exchanging opinions, I'm not an extremist. Extremism starts when you refute other people's ideas violently. And you also said that social media is a tool used by people in the way they want. So if they want to isolate themselves, they can. And sometimes we talk about echo chambers. Because we are working or we are living in closed circles, and if we want to be open to others, then we do so. But if we want to isolate ourselves in this chamber or this circle, then this would lead to more isolation and more polarization. So you are saying that isolation is a decision we make for ourselves. Yes, I think it is a decision that we can make, and I can use social media either to be more isolated, or I can make the other choice of being more open towards others. Of course, we are defining extremism today based on our own views, and not on the views of extremists, because extremists think that we are like this and we want to be like this, and of course we refuse anyone who has a different opinion. So the extremists cannot even tolerate different point of views. And but I'm talking about like the beginning of this line, and we can all be led to become extremists. Of course, I'm not saying that we are extremists who got to a point where they cannot even tolerate others, but whenever you consider that, or whenever you are ahead or facing any threat or any danger, then this will make you an extremist. And the more or the bigger the danger is, the more isolated you will become and the more extremist you will become. So of course, but this doesn't mean that whenever you have a conviction that you are an extremist. Of course, I agree with you. If we go to the end of this line, and if we do not tolerate to share these opinions with others, then of course we will all be extremists. Any other observations or comments? Abada gave us an idea of how the situation is in Lebanon, but we would like to hear from Algeria, Libya, other countries. I'm come from Jordan. I have a question to Mr. Khalid. Today, as a result of technological openness, our children are, of course, users of social media, and they are exposed to this openness. They are exposed to some pages, to some individuals, which might lead them to become extremists. Do you think that there are any indicators or any ways that we could use as parents in communicating with our children in order to help them avoid these paths, and how can we convince them not to consume so much time on social media and in that virtual world? Usually anyone who becomes an extremist or who is someone who had trauma in the past. So this trauma leads to a kind of reaction, and this reaction leads them to this ideology. So your son will never become an extremist unless he suffers from any psychological or social problems which will affect his coping mechanism and will lead him to extremism. But if he is fine with himself, if he is self-satisfied, then he will not be affected. Can you give us an example? So do you have a specific example? Sometimes we see that children who come from good families, who were well raised, but when they are exposed to Facebook and to the ideas sometimes that are spread on social media, they are affected. So in spite of the good education that they have received, and this leads them to extremism or to fanaticism, and I think that this is dangerous. Even when we talk about religion, we can be moderately or we can believe in a moderate way, and we can believe in a very fanatic or extremist way. Yes, your question is very interesting, and here I disagree with Khalid when he says that the majority of ISIL fighters were previous prisoners or former prisoners. No, of course, many of them were former prisoners, but many are attracted as well, and they were not imprisoned, or they do not have this past. So we need also to realize this capacity they have to convince people and to attract them or to recruit them. Jad, Khadija, Rita Zgheb. I'm a university professor, and I also work with one of the schools. I have a question for you. Do you think that, of course, based on your experience, do you think that scientific reasoning versus social media? So on social media, of course, we can express ourselves without any control or without any rules. And it's a very simple way to do it. Very often discussions on social media are superficial, they are not really deep. And based on the experience we had with Mrs. Sarah Malat, when we had this exercise of story filing, I discovered that very often we base our information on very basic information without really going deep into the story. So the question is the following: based on your experience, do you agree with what I have said? And if we introduce to our school curricula such new methods, would we be able to balance without having to fight against anything? So we're trying to think about a positive alternative to deal with this. I think that media literacy is very important, and I have said at the beginning that yesterday I was convinced with the importance of media literacy, but I give the priority to criticism. And I think that we need to work with our students on this, so to help them make the difference between the information they get, to be able to analyze, to assess the discourse that they are hearing. As Nadine said, we can see nowadays people who are educated, the third generation people who were raised in Europe, and we ask ourselves, why do we have thousands of people, for example, in Tunisia, who were forbidden from traveling? So in a country that went through a democratic transition. I know what it means to mobilize people or to instigate hate and violence and all this. I know how ideologies work, and I know how we can work on ourselves to be neutral and impartial, to be objective. Of course, we cannot simplify information. And unfortunately, nowadays, competition doesn't allow us to do so. I don't know if I have answered your question. Jad? I just have a suggestion. If we can deal with the issue of extremism and talk a bit about violent extremism. Because of course there is a difference if my son is a Barcelona fan and he's like fanatic about it, but and a very big difference between him and another person who is ready to leave his family and then go to a fight in Syria and Iraq. And we need also to think beyond religious extremism that we see in our region, because we can see that in Europe there is racial extremism. In October maybe we will have maybe the first extremist country after the Nazi since the Second World War. In the US we can see, of course, that there are people who support Donald Trump. We can see also in Europe and elsewhere all these movements against refugees, against immigrants. So what is the role of media literacy here, and what is the role of digital media? So what makes people ready to kill, to fight, to attack, or even to instigate for more violence and hate through social media? Who would like to answer? Here I'd like to have a short comment on the Barcelona issue. I'm a supporter of AC Milan and Juventus, but in sports courts sometimes they fight, and when we see this, we are surprised. We are surprised to see them fighting sometimes, and of course this is also a kind of extremism. Yes, of course, but it is different when you have a reaction, when you are angry. it's different than when you plan and then you travel and you are ready to face any sort of dangers to kill other people. According to my study, Dr. Jad, the youngsters usually use the social media as a platform for expression, and their reactions sometimes turn into violent reactions due to all kinds of mobilization that was also done through social media, whether religious or any other kind of mobilization. One of the youngsters so had very violent reactions with his parents, and his parents didn't know where did he get his ideas from, and they didn't know to which closed groups he belonged, etc. So of course the role of social media were to provide a platform for expression and a platform for social mobilization. I think that we need to talk also about the role of the media. When it comes to media, there is always this misuse of power. So either in the US or even here in Lebanon, we have fear-based media. So we always use this as a tool to spread fear, to perpetuate fear and anxiety, and we are not providing alternative narratives in the media. And it's very important to acknowledge this. Because when you have an alternative narrative, then you have a choice. But when all your media is focused only on fear and anxiety, then it is normal that people will be anxious and they will choose or will resort to the right wing or to the extremist alternative. I think that the media is a booster. So of course there are social, psychological and other factors, and the media comes to push these to the surface. Dr. Jad, you talked also about media literacy. I also saw some cases when I was doing my study. Why did we talk about elite schools and other schools? Of course, we cannot say that all private schools are elite schools, but there was only one school that adopted this media literacy education and introduced this education since very small. With very small children, and this school is not afraid for its students because they are ready, they are well equipped, and they are exposed to all types of messages, and they have shown me messages from ISIL, from other groups, but they are immunized thanks to this media literacy education that they have received. But while other schools, very poor schools, they are of course exposed, and they are at danger because students, of course, are exposed to reactions, whether religious or other types of reactions. Khadija? Aisha, not Khadija. I would like to say that extremism is an international phenomenon and not only an Islamic or Muslim phenomenon. It is also a historical phenomenon. And of course, Dr. Jad talked about the First World War, and I think that all wars throughout histories were due to extremism. And here I would like to say that extremism can have two reasons. First, this inferior view that we have of others, so as if we held the absolute truth and we had the right to judge other people and treat them as we want. And the second reason, of course, is related to the media. The media is not the main responsible for extremism, but it has contributed to the spread of this phenomenon, because sometimes the media focuses on some issues and not others. And talking about social media, of course, they were not behind extremism, but are a tool used for or to attain extremist objectives. But the model of, or the example of Algeria is very important, because Algeria went through this phase even before social media, and you had what was called civil war. And even before the emergence of social media. So, and here I have a question for you, please. So, in the case of Algeria, media literacy is of course necessary, but we cannot forget the surrounding environment, the family, the tribe. Yes, but in Algeria there were also other factors that have contributed to the emergence and spread of extremism. And up till now, there are still we are still suffering from the effects of this.
I have 3 questions. 1, what about youth culture? I can imagine that youth can do things on Facebook and WhatsApp that do not reflect extremism, but a youth culture that could reflect their opposition to society, which is a normal behavior among youth. Therefore, if I'm wearing a niqab, would that be extremism, or would that reflect an opposition to my parents' culture, environment, or the country where I live, or the village where I live? I want to know to what extent we have certain characteristics of youth behavior in Lebanon that would allow us to better understand the things that Abada talked about. Second, what is the role of the recurrent crisis in Lebanon, as well as the problems in the north, in Beirut, in the south? If I am a young woman from Bekaa, I could be residing in a village where people go and fight in Syria, or a region that faces cultural or economic and social political problems. So what is the role of these crises in the different regions on the youth and their use of media? Therefore, I need to understand what is the socio-economic background for these youth in order for me to understand and assess the behavior or the use of media. Lastly, Nadine talked about the role of public service. I reside in Germany, and I know that the role of the public service in Germany is very strong, even though there is a strong right-wing tendency. They do not use the public service. The presence of public service covers is in fact diversified and tries to be as objective as possible and respect the principles of journalism. Therefore, it makes it difficult for me to reach the different segments of society. I don't know why you said that the countries that have public service have a lesser extent of extremism. In Austria, they also have public service, but this has shown so far that this is not necessarily a means to protect against extremism. Before the changes, dictatorships held the media within the confines of public service. Concerning public service, The study that I was using included 25 countries in Europe. Countries with public service and versatile media have lesser extremism, and this allows people not to resort to extremism. In Australia, and where I used to live, there is an important fraction of extremism, and these were providing society with information and represented its voice. It included Arabic, Japanese, Chinese, as well as different languages from this immigrant society. When someone hears his voice and his news on the public service, he feels that he is not isolated. Of course, it will not solve the problem, but it will alleviate it. This is the role of the public service. Did you have another question? I'd like to comment. Based on what Nadine said, public service and official media is affected by the regime where it works. We're talking about democratic regimes that allow the diversity of opinions of public or of parties and opposition. Therefore, if it is a flourishing environment, it will not lead to a society that is an incubator for extremism. Concerning the youth culture, Abaida, have the crisis in Lebanon promoted this tendency, even though we do not have this trend? We rather have confessional extremism and the rejection of the other. The integration models in Syria or the social integration aspects, aren't they limited in Lebanon? Few people were killed in Akkad. If my friend has Salafist belonging, or rather extremist Sunni, I will find that there is a similarity between what is happening in Syria, and this could affect their personality. Through social media, I can know that a relative was killed in Syria, for example. So I'm not only talking about personal experiences, or through social media. There are several cases that are close to us. Before I answer you about the crisis, allow me to answer the question about extremism, whether it is a behavior or a cultural thing among youth. It is a human phenomena. It's not a global phenomena. It starts by being extremist and by supporting a specific idea. Mobilization decides whether it will develop into a behavior that is extremist, and the mobilization, be it media, social, etc., plays a prominent role in defining whether this behavior will turn violent or not. Youth in social studies are usually rebellious against their parents and any other type of authority. I'm not saying extremist violence or violent extremism. I would like to highlight two cases that resulted from the interviews. The first is one of the youth from the south had this reaction on the Sunni Salafi Sheikh in Akkar. After Hezbollah involvement in Syria, this man, or this young man, comes from a resistance family. His brother is fighting with Hezbollah, and this is more involved in the people who are more involved in the Syrian crisis, and they are translating their behaviors in this violence. And Another man came from Baalbek and they had witnessed an armed conflict that led to several people who were injured. Khalid, do you have a comment? The regional conflict and the Syrian crisis in coverage in schools in Beirut, these schools and the youth in these schools are not interested in the subject at all. Khalid, I want to ask you to analyze with me. I will give you an example of a young man who went to Syria. I am now working with his sister. She's 18. Let's call her Mariam. She came to me because she was cutting herself and she was beating herself. She had several problems. She comes from a very religious family. When she was 2, her father was incarcerated because he belonged to an Islamic group, and her dad disappeared when she was 2. Her brother is 4 years older, or was 4 years older. The mother had psychological issues due to her parents as well. She used to beat her children. She did not care about them. The father was a sheikh also, and he was involved in Islamic groups. She came to me because she was working and she was able to pay my fees from the job that she had. 4 years ago, her brother decided to go to Syria, and he was killed around 1 year ago, and this was another shock to her. She has her father is a physical abuser. He considers that the more he beats his children, the better education he gives them. He's home on and off. The mother is depressed. What do you want to say, Khalid? Muhammad, who went to Syria, why did he go? Just to defend a certain ideology, or was he running away from his parents? We still have 20 minutes. Do you still have any questions, just to know how we can allocate time? Can we take questions from you people? During this workshop, one of the colleagues showed us a movie on Lebanese media. Some TV stations in Lebanon say or support a certain confession. We saw reports on the sale of Christian lands in certain regions. To what extent does this play a role in this instigation? So this question is, to what extent do TV stations play a role in instigation? I would like to comment on the Ta'if agreement that put an end to the Lebanese civil war. The Lebanese entity is based on confessional proportionalism, and in light of the new Lebanese constitution, the Ta'if agreement divided the Lebanese TV stations on religious leaders. Therefore, they became the spokespersons and of these people and these confessions. As Dr. Jad said, these are a propaganda for leaders. I would like to say that the Lebanese media law distributed media on religious leaders, and at any point in time, these all become spokespersons of these confessions. This is their distribution. You cannot expect anything else as long as we still have the current media law. I am Prime Minister. I have taken over a media and a radio, a TV and a radio station, and we know that some people are not allowed to go on certain stations. We would like to hear more examples from outside Lebanon as well as other examples, because we want to understand the regional problems. We know that in Iraq there is a bloody conflict. How do people survive? How are they guided by media? Maybe we can talk extensively about Iraq, because Al-Qaeda started operating in Iraq in an intensive manner before the arrival of ISIS. I can talk to you about media and TV in Iraq, as well as media, social media. This study on Lebanon, what did it remind you of? We have TV stations that have a pure confessional discourse. We have the Sunni, the Shiite discourse. These TV stations are spokespersons on behalf of these confessions. There are also social media that have an instigation speech or a hate speech. These social media mobilize a group of people in order to attack a certain confession, party, movement. Therefore, social media have become more important than TV stations and traditional media. Therefore, I believe that the majority of the youth are affected by social media. I have conducted a study 2 months ago that highlighted that faculty students are more in touch or are using more social media, and they use mobile phones more. As Nadine said, the youth stopped watching TV stations and are more into using social media. Therefore, I think that social media play a more prominent role. You said that the youth are using social media, but distinguish between those that are instigating hatred or not. There are elites and political figures. However, we are now aware of the importance of media literacy. So when I go back to my country, I have the responsibility to raise the awareness of my students of what is happening in media, especially those social media outlets. I should talk about this with my neighbors, with my family, because media literacy play an important role in protecting the individual from what is being disseminated on media, especially social media. In educating them and criticizing, analyzing, and maybe producing literacy or a media the product that is far from any confession, any identity. It should only be a human message. We are sick and tired of confessionalism. Concerning social media, we should always remember that there are the traditional media that are also present on social media, and they are introducing and using their issues on social media through giant media that have the money and the funding to open important channels on social media. What is the alternative? NGOs and smaller groups are also using social media in order to counter traditional media outlets. In addition to the comments, TV is a media whereby you are a passive recipient. In social media, you can express your voice. It is different from TV, therefore we cannot compare them. Therefore, we said, or we have distinguished between the hatred speech and mobilizing speech. We said that the hatred speech is going through TV and the mobilization is going through social media. When we talked about journalists as gatekeepers, they have a training and an experience, and they have more discretion to decide what he says and the way he says it. While on social media, anyone can say anything without any filter, accountability, without any responsibility. Sometimes we see fighters on TV and not journalists. Naira Barakat from Palestine. I would like to shed the light on the media role in Palestine and how the youth is affected by social media. Social media is a means to instigate and to promote the feelings of the youth through posts, publications, and songs, and revolutionary songs by a specific party, or by the showing of specific videos and images that are partisan and that are take sides with Hamas and other parties. I would like to remind you that social media has played an important role in the last protests and has affected the youth writings and posts, which led them to being arrested by the occupation forces, as well as attacks that were highly politicized. Facebook, the name of Facebook was mostly controlled by the Israeli security services. Social media could be a very dangerous platform for the Palestinian youth and their future, because it is controlled 24/7. So one interview could lead to the arrest, to direct attacks on a specific person. Social media is a red line. It affects the minds of the of the Palestinian youth. Josh Hanna from Lebanon. I'd like to ask about the Lebanese educational system. It started in the 1900s through certain missionaries. Similarly, now every person or every party, if we can say, has a specific school. Therefore, when we are educating people, we are creating this bubble. This bubble is present, and secular schools are very few in Lebanon. We are now, our schools are similar to any supermarket now. Therefore, we have a suggestion. We can use social media outside these ideals in order to gather people around a common idea. It was made in order to be a certain reflection for an idea. We are the situation or the horizon looks dark. However, we need to find solutions and we need to keep on trying. You had a question? I wanted to say that extremism feeds extremism. When we have extremist positions to defend solutions. When we talk about the Prime Minister, for example, we have people who defend the Sunni, and when we talk about the Speaker of the Parliament, we have Shiites who defend him, and we have the Orthodox elections law. At the same time, we lack moderate speech and dialogue. I think that social media and media literacy is a solution that will require time. We cannot directly feel its implications. However, how can we face this hatred and extremist dialogue? We cannot face extremism with a peaceful dialogue, because you will not gain popularity. You need to have an agenda that is similar to extremism, but have an efficient result. You should fight for it. You have to show people that you are strong to gain their support. However, you will not gain their support by showing that you are peaceful. You will not attract audiences. In order to face this extremism, we've had several experiments abroad. ISIS was the target of several jokes outside. It showed the videos of massacring or burning people, and people used to mock them. And when this behavior was mocked, this helped reduce the strength of ISIS on media. This could be a way to face extremist speech. Do you have anything to add? لدي سؤال عن التعرض والانتشار، لأن وسائل الإعلام هي مساحة تسمح بالتعبير عن القصص والأفكار البديلة، ويمكنها أن تكون مكانا يسمح للشباب بالتعبير عن نفسه. إن الخط بين وسائل الإعلام والتواصل الاجتماعي باتت غير واضحة، وأنا أشعر تقريبا بأن الأصوات المستقلة يتم إغراقها من قبل وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي. على هذه الوسائل كنت أحاول أن أبحث بشكل خاص عن تغطية على حصار حلب. قررت أن أبحث عن هذا الموضوع على فيسبوك، وسوف أستخدم هاشتاجز من أجل إيجاد أصوات مختلفة، وكنت بحاجة إلى البحث في أكثر من 7 صفحات لكي أجد وسائل ومصادر خارجة عن وسائل التواصل التقليدية. نادين مدونة، وهي تكتب عن مواضيع بديلة من أجل الوصول إلى مختلف الجماهير. وإن قرر أحدهم البحث عن معلومات مختلفة أو بديلة، يجد عددا كبيرا من المصادر لا أدري إن كان بإمكاننا أن نتحدث عنها. هذا ما تحدثته. لدينا عدد من القنوات الإعلامية وشركات الإعلام التي تملك الأموال والتي تستثمر في وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، وهي تنتقل من وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي التقليدية من أجل تغيير البيئة. كان لدينا مدونون يواجهون الصحافة التقليدية والدولة، ونرى اليوم أن عددا كبيرا من المدونين يكررون الأفكار التي تعبر عنها وسائل التواصل التقليدي ووسائل الإعلام التقليدي، وبالتالي يتم إغراق هذه الأصوات المعارضة. ولكن من أجل مواجهة هذا الموضوع يجب أن نتمتع بدراية أكبر في الإعلام، وهذا ما يحاول جاد أن يقوم به، ويجب أن يبدأ ذلك بوسائل التواصل التقليدية. ويجب على المستثمرين أن يستثمروا في أصوات بديلة من أجل إيجاد طرق للحصول على أو للفت انتباه الناس من دون اللجوء إلى الخوف أو المواضيع التي يتم تغطيتها من خلال وسائل التواصل التقليدية، لأن الناس يبتعدون عنها، وبالتالي يحاول الناس أن يغيروا مواضيعهم وكيفية التواصل مع هذه المواضيع. When I didn't get an answer on one of the three questions that you raised, I have a question that follows up on this point actually. Based on your interviews with the youth, maybe you can give us positive examples of how they use media. We're talking and focusing on the negativities, but I think that there is a positive aspect because youth design the programs that they like. If they like a specific program on YouTube related to things such as cooking, scientific things, they can create a design of the programs that they like. So based on your interviews, you have discovered how youth deal positively with the media. There are several cases, and I'll start with the youth who tried to convey a message on social media to their schools and society. They started shooting videos in order to convey certain messages on how they want to make a change with the help of their teachers. They have conveyed messages on the dangers of drug use, of women abuse, and girls abuse in conservative societies. They have sent messages about the veil and who is the honest woman. They have held several fora and they conveyed it to the teachers and to the administration. There are other tentatives related to the use of colors and drawings, and the school is playing an important role in the use of media in a positive way. Parents are playing a role, students, teachers, and schools are playing an important role as well. Nadine talked about the new narrative, and Khalid said that in order to respond to this violent extremism, we need to adopt a specific manner or a specific response. We shouldn't only be peaceful. Arab or Arab secular countries have failed after they transformed into dictatorships and they were replaced by religious extremism. I have two questions. Is there a narrative that we can adopt today in order to respond to this extremism? If this narrative is absent, are we going to create it? How can you imagine it? Media literacy is being promoted in our country. We are not only promoting critical thinking or the use of digital media, but also the implementation through civil work. If this narrative exists, what is it? Otherwise, what is the alternative?
I think we need to think about the reason behind the extremism. today extremists are providing solutions for all the problems or the grievings of the world. And in order to solve this problem, we need also to think about alternative solutions, about how we can help people to empower themselves. And as long as people will still have this feeling that they are, that they do not have any voice, that do not have any capacity, then the extremism will always be their sole alternative. For example, I personally, when I talk about a problem, when I write about a problem in this or that country, I always try to give solutions, to give ideas for solutions, to see how we can give a role for youth, how we can help them contribute to the solution of the problem, so that they are not only passive, that they will not keep waiting for the solution to come from outside. I think that there is no alternative discourse. We often hear attempts to interpret Islam. Some people say there are misinterpretations, some others say no, there are no misinterpretations. So we are in this vicious circle, and as Khaled has just said, we are ready. We are in our subconsciousness, by nature, we are born mobilized against the other. So, and this is creating this negative attitude towards others. And maybe Nadine is right when she says that we need an alternative discourse. I think we need also different attitudes on the institutional level. So we were living under dictatorships, and then we discovered that such oppression led to this tendency to kill, to be violent, etc. Maybe in more democratic countries, maybe where there are active institutions, maybe if we have the right representation, if we have the right democratic system or mechanism, we will be able to change. And of course, we will have a lot to do. There was a pilot study led by the Samir Qasir Foundation, and according to the first findings, young people are attracted to some messages because they are powerful, they are attractive. Sometimes when they mock, this is attractive. Lara talked about songs. And this study said that sometimes radical messages are sung just to make them more attractive. So most probably what you have said, if we can think about a counter narrative in a powerful and attractive way, it might be also good. I don't think that we have alternative ideologies anymore, and we have seen that even after the Arab Spring and all the developments, there was no alternative. So there were only no to this, no to that, but without any other solution. So, for example, I thought at the beginning that the media could change the society. But then step by step I discovered that it was not that easy, and in order to change societies we need to start with families. But up till now I'm still looking for alternatives. I still don't know if in order to achieve this change on a social level we need to proceed from the ground and up, or the other way around. So we do not have any alternative, and we do not have people who are real thinkers, who are writing interesting ideas, or maybe there are, but their ideas are not yet adopted, because we often criticize, but we never command on anyone. So, and maybe that's the reason why we haven't found any alternative yet. But despite this, I am still very optimistic, and I think that we need to keep on looking for new ideas. Here I would like to add that there were movements of and waves of youth movements that happened last year in Lebanon. And I was covering these movements, and these movements were calling for change, they were calling for solutions. But when traditional media inflated these movements, they were lost, and this led to, or this inflation was followed by a deflation of movement. And these movements were at the beginning very good because they knew what they wanted, but then they deflated, and then we started hearing that we do not want this and we do not want that, so they were transformed into negative movements. So I think that our time is up. Maybe we have one last question.
Okay.
There are many sites. Kamil Fahad from Lebanon. There are many sites that are trying to limit extremism, like YouTube that is banning today hate speech and other sites. How can we limit extremism without affecting freedom of expression? Of course, this is a very important question now. If you notice, all Arab laws, and particularly in Kuwait, for example, in Kuwait they are in the process of promulgating a law, that allows them to have a prior censorship on any tweet, any content that you want to put on the internet. And this is also very controversial because we are, of course, claiming to prevent extremism. However, we are promulgating laws that can affect freedom of expression. And of course, we know that there are so many people who were incarcerated because they expressed their opinion. And I think that this question will be the issue of the future. Yesterday, Lina said that Twitter was blamed for instigating violence and extremism, and then of course Twitter said that they were a platform and that they were doing their best to limit this. So we are living in an unprecedented era, and we still do not know where this will lead us. And it is not ISIL that broke all borders, it is the social media that did. And because one tweet is enough to mobilize people from all over the world to, of course, to join any movement. So, and we still do not know how we can control this or how we can deal with this without having any effect on the freedom of expression. That's why we need a strong alternative discourse. Today we have a moderate discourse, however this moderate discourse is still very weak. Here I would like to share with you a story that happened with my wife, Yasmin Dabbous. I think you know her. Like 10 to 15 years ago, she was working with the Daily Star, and she was in Majd al-Anjar. She was asked to cover a very big problem between the Sunni and the Armenians in Majd al-Anjar. And of course her article was very well written, but the editor wouldn't accept such article because she said that we do not want to show tensions. I'm talking, and this story happened like 10 to 15 years ago, where there were no social media yet. And we still ask ourselves, was it like an oppression, a kind of oppression, or did this article, or would this article have a good or a bad effect on the society? thank you. We'll break for coffee now.